My name is Chana DeWolf, and my husband, Ashwin DeWolf, is also here. We are listed on the program as presenting together. However, I'm going to give the presentation. We kind of have a very strong division of labor a lot of times in our lab, and also in terms of speaking engagements as well. And he gave the last one, so here I am. Title of our talk today is Cryopreservation of the Ischemic Patient. And first I'm going to start telling you just a little bit about our company, which is currently composed just of Ashwin and I. We are a neural cryobiology research company founded in August 2008 by myself and Ashwin. And our focus is on researching cryonics procedures under realistic conditions. And I will talk about that in a moment. What I mean by realistic conditions. But in general, our emphasis is going to be on optimizing protocols for ischemic patients. And I was amazed not to hear that word at all in Greg's talk. So let me define ischemia, and that is, if you haven't heard it before as a signed-up member, there's a lot of talk about ischemia in cryonics. And it's just a restriction of blood flow, blood supply to tissues, resulting in a lack of oxygen and glucose, which is essential for cellular metabolism and keeping those tissues alive. So in cryonics, we're almost always talking about cerebral ischemia as a result of cardiac arrest after legal pronouncement of death. In our lab, we do use a rodent model, a rat model, in order to simulate cryopreservation scenarios. So just a really small picture of just one tiny part of our lab. We actually, I wanted to take some better ones, but these were taken right after we moved into a significantly larger space, which is still way too small. But that's just sort of our wet bench with a little bit of equipment there. We have a specialized perfusion table set up on loan to us from Alcor, actually, and a number of instruments in an instrumentation room as well. So I'm going to start off by talking about a little bit about the kind of research that's been done historically in cryonics and specifically in cryobiology that we apply to cryonics. And the title of our slide here, what you see in the lab is what you don't get. And what I mean by that is that under ideal circumstances, human cryopreservation procedures could be started and completed in the same location, such as a hospital. That would be it is a fantastic goal of ours, obviously not to have to perform cryonics operations under the conditions that we do today. It would be great if it was a medically recognized procedure that could be carried out under hospital conditions after the end of an agonal period and upon pronouncement of death, or before. Many of the protocols and solutions used in cryonics today, however, were developed based on the results of experiments conducted under such conditions. For example, Alcor's vitrification solution, M22, which Greg has talked a lot about, eliminates ice formation under those ideal or non-ischemic conditions. However, in the real world, there are several obstacles to a good ice-free cryopreservation. So here are some of those obstacles to consider. Not all of us are nice, young, healthy animals with no pathologies before legal pronouncement of death. In fact, I would venture to say that almost no one is cryopreserved under those conditions. So there are often premortem pathologies such as hypotension and some degree of cerebral ischemia prior to legal pronouncement of death after a prolonged agonal period, for example. Then we have the issue of postmortem ischemia, of course, either warm or cold, which I'll discuss at greater length on a subsequent slide. You can have no cooling efforts at all, or poor cooling efforts, depending on the team or the situation that the patient is in upon pronouncement of death. There can be transport delays in getting the patient to the cryonics organization. And as my picture kind of cartoon over there indicates, there's always the possibility of hostile third-party interference, often from family members who do not agree with patients' cryonics arrangements, or in last-minute cases, we see this more frequently as well. And that can, of course, introduce all sorts of delays and complications in providing a good cryopreservation. So based on, one thing I wanted to mention is that, oh, thank you. Thanks, Maria. So one thing I wanted to mention about all of these things is that most of these can be modeled in the lab to some degree, so that we can evaluate the effects of these obstacles on the quality of preservation, and we can also evaluate some possible ways to improve outcomes for patients under these conditions. So let's talk about some different cryopreservation scenarios. As you may have guessed, this is going to be a very practically focused talk. So I'm going to talk about a number of different scenarios that we see, again, in real-world conditions in cryonics organizations. These scenarios I'm going to list in order ranging from ideal to the worst case scenario. So the most ideal case would be that you have no ischemia or negligible ischemia. No ischemia is very, very difficult to induce outside of a laboratory setting. But say we have negligible ischemia and cardiopulmonary support plus very rapid cooling. This would be the condition most usually of a local case. After that, we might see a remote stabilization, not a local case, but in combination with washout and prompt shipping to a cryonics facility. So not perfectly ideal, but quite a good scenario. Beyond that, we can see periods of prolonged cold ischemia and periods of warm ischemia, generally greater than an hour is what we're talking about, plus in combination with a period of cold ischemia too. So, and then worst case scenario, we're talking about a straight freeze typically after more than 72 hours of ischemia. And a good example of that is an autopsy case, which is about the worst case scenario you can possibly come up with for a cryopreservation. And in all of these, except the last scenario, I do want to point out the patient's blood in all of these cases is being replaced with a vitrification agent aimed at eliminating ice formation in all of these scenarios. In the worst case scenario, the straight freeze, there is no cryoprotective perfusion because it's deemed not possible at that point for various reasons. So there's no cryoprotective perfusion at all, and the patient is frozen without cryoprotection. So lots of freezing, lots of ice crystal formation in that situation. All right, go through these really, really quickly in terms of how ideal and what we can expect in terms of outcomes. So in the ideal case, we have the immediate start of stabilization procedures after pronouncement of legal death. That would include typically mechanical cardiopulmonary support, rapid induction of hypothermia, and administration of heparin and neuroprotectants. And when we model this scenario in the lab, the outcome, of course, as you might expect, given the work that's been done under all of these ideal conditions, is no or little ice formation in the brain at all. Typically no gross observable ice formation that we can see whatsoever. And many local Alcor cases fall into this category, so that's fantastic. You really want to keep that in mind in terms of optimizing your cryopreservation. So in the case of a remote stabilization, again, we're talking about immediate start of stabilization procedures after the pronouncement of death. This is then followed by blood washout with an organ preservation solution, such as MHP2, and prompt shipping of the patient. And, again, the ideal case before is ideal. And in reality, patients often need to be stabilized before a long-distance transport to the cryonics facility for cryoprotective perfusion and long-term care at low temperatures. So we try to optimize the situation by performing a blood washout and shipping the patient as promptly as possible. And when we model this scenario, again, in the lab, we see no or little ice formation in the brain. Now we start getting into more interesting territory. With prolonged periods of cold ischemia, because a patient can't be cooled below the freezing point of water before introduction of the cryoprotectant, the time between the initial stabilization after pronouncement of death and start of cryopreservation procedures at the cryonics facility is a time of prolonged cold ischemia. You might also find this situation in the case of a sudden, well, not a sudden death, but a death where a person is kept in a morgue cooler for some period of time before they can reach the cryonics facility as well. And in general, as the duration of cold ischemia increases, there will be progressive perfusion impairment and ice formation in the brain. So we've modeled varying time periods of cold ischemia, and I kind of just wanted to be pretty oriented towards kind of worst case scenarios again. So after 48 hours of cold ischemia, we start seeing severe problems, including complete breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, evidenced by brain swelling. We also see severe whole-body edema in addition to swelling of the brain, and severe perfusion impairment and ice formation. So then we can also have a condition of warm ischemia plus cold ischemia. And when we model this, say 1 hour of warm ischemia, normothermic warm ischemia, and greater than 24 hours of cold ischemia, we also see, again, what you might expect at that, under those conditions, severe perfusion impairment and ice formation in the brain. So obviously, if you don't receive rapid cooling, you are going to experience a prolonged period of warm ischemia prior to being cooled and experiencing, hopefully, a short period of cold ischemia, but a varying period of cold ischemia as well, depending on whether you're being shipped or you're close to the facility. So examples here would be cases without standby and cases of sudden death. Not a situation you want to find yourself in. This is an example of what we call a brain map in our lab, just a really, really basic way for us to qualitatively assess perfusion impairment and ice formation. One of the great things about our rodent model is that we can just remove the brains. Unlike in a cryonics patient at your organization, we can take the brains completely out after perfusion, and then we can actually see perfusion impairment based on these. I color it pink because that's exactly what it looks like in the rat brain, are these pink areas due to residual blood left in the vasculature indicating impairment. And ice formation over here obviously is indicated in blue. And what's important to note is that we always see ice formation where there is perfusion impairment. Not always the other way around, because sometimes this perfusion impairment is not grossly observable to us. And we are using a gross observation method. But it's always extremely consistent that where there is perfusion impairment, there is ice formation. So one of the major goals of our lab, of course, is to eliminate both, but aiming at reducing or eliminating perfusion impairment in the goal of eliminating ice formation. This is 1 hour of warm ischemia. Certainly doesn't look good. We've got a lot of freezing on the ventral surface of the brain. Also, the entire cortex in the two slices where I make an evaluation. If you compare that, though, with the 1 hour of warm ischemia and 24 hours of cold ischemia, which results in almost complete perfusion impairment and ice formation, you'll see that cold ischemia really is still quite a big problem even after a period of warm ischemia. There's still a lot of damaging ischemic processes going on during cold ischemia, even at very low temperatures. So what are some solutions to these problems now that we've kind of talked about a few different real-world scenarios, cryonic scenarios? So cold ischemia is what we focused on first. And there are a number of different solutions to the issues that we've just talked about. One being blood substitution or washout with a suitable organ preservation solution. Now we've compared controls, that is without blood substitution, against several washout solutions and have found that MHP2, which is Alcor's washout solution, is the best. And what I mean by that is that in all cases we have observed that blood substitution does confer significant benefits in terms of improving cryoprotective perfusion and reducing ice formation in the brain, but in particular, MHP2 outperformed the other solutions, and it has allowed us to conduct cryoprotective perfusion after 48 hours of cold bloodless ischemia with no ice formation in the brain after cooling below the glass transition temperature of the vitrification solution. So that really vindicates, obviously, the practice of remote blood substitution in cryonics. But it also emphasizes that the composition of the organ preservation solution matters a great deal. It's very important. And I do want to point out here, too, that I've said 48 hours, up to 48 hours of cold bloodless ischemia with no ice formation in the brain using MHP2, but even at 72 hours of cold bloodless ischemia, we see relatively little ice formation as compared to a control where we've left the blood in the brain, which is completely frozen, of course. 72 hours is a very long time, and we do see improvement after washout. So that's really, really good news for current cryonics practice. Obviously, you can expedite shipping as well. The faster you get there, the better. And then one very interesting method that we've noted has improved outcomes is cryoprotective perfusion with a high viscosity cryoprotective agent. There's an exclamation point next to that because that is kind of a counterintuitive finding because perfusing a higher viscosity solution results in a longer perfusion time, poorer equilibration of the cryoprotective agent, and increased toxicity. But nevertheless, we have found that there's a reduction of perfusion impairment and decreased ice formation when we use higher viscosity CPA. Warm ischemia, on the other hand, is a very hard problem. It is an entirely different animal from cold ischemia, and we have a number of ideas for ways to mitigate perfusion impairment and ultimately ice formation after warm ischemia, but that work is still in progress. We've had much easier success, I should say, in dealing with cold ischemia than warm ischemia so far. You can't just regard warm ischemia as the same as cold ischemia, but faster or sped up. There's something different entirely going on. Okay, so like I said, in our lab, it's great. We can take the brain out of the rat and take a good look at it and see what our outcomes are. Unfortunately, as a cryonics patient, that's a little more difficult. So we have to look for other signs of good care, primarily in the operating room when you're undergoing cryoprotective perfusion. Signs of good care at this point are no or little swelling or edema during cryoprotective perfusion, the blood-brain barrier still being intact as evidenced by dehydration of the brain, which Greg talked about to some length earlier, good flow, stable pressures, and little vascular resistance during perfusion, and then of course being able to actually reach the terminal concentration of the vitrification solution. So those are all signs that that you've received good, the patient has received good care up until that point. So that's kind of the results of some of our very early research in the lab, very broadly speaking. Now I want to talk about some things that we've looked at just more recently over the past year in collaboration with a number of different organizations. One of the first projects that we worked on this year in 2012 was delayed washout research. So again, we're really interested in what happens when things go wrong or things are not ideal in the field. So this particular research was sponsored by Longecity and the Cryonics Institute, and it's aimed at investigating the effects of a delayed washout. And ultimately, we're trying to answer the question at the bottom, does it still make sense to do blood washout, blood substitution, after a prolonged period of warm ischemia? So do we still benefit from washout if you're not able to reach the patient in a timely manner? And the effects of delayed washout that we've observed are that as the duration of warm ischemia increases, of course, the beneficial effects of washout decrease. So we see more ice formation with a longer period of warm ischemia. And in general, up to about 50 minutes of warm ischemia, we do see that blood washout with MHP2 is better than no washout at all. So we do see less perfusion impairment and ice formation in those conditions than if you wouldn't do blood washout, if you would just forego it altogether. But around 60 minutes, about 1 hour, seems so strange that of course it would fall right around that period. But at about 60 minutes of warm ischemia, then we don't see any difference anymore. We do see complete freezing of the brain even if we perform a washout, a blood substitution after 60 minutes of warm ischemia. One of the other projects that we have been approached to carry out this year is in collaboration with Alcor to validate field vitrification for overseas cases. This has been a topic that's been bandied about for many, many years, and we kind of just wanted to jump in and start doing a little research to see if we can validate field vitrification protocols. So in this case, we're looking at the protocol of a patient being cryopreserved with increasing concentrations of M22 at 0 degrees Celsius. So that differs from vitrification in the OR in that we're introducing the cryoprotectant just at 0 degrees and not reducing the temperature any further than that at the same time. That would be very difficult to do in the field, whereas you can pack a patient in ice and get them to 0 degrees, of course, and introduce cryoprotective agent at the same time. Then the patient is shipped to the Alcor facility on dry ice for cooling to liquid nitrogen temperature and long-term care. So we modeled this in the lab and saw no ice formation in the brain after field vitrification protocol that I just discussed, and 48 hours of dry ice shipping. And then we also compared this against a remote blood washout. So we also saw no ice formation in the brain after remote blood washout and 48 hours of water ice shipping and cryoprotective perfusion. And then, of course, our control at the bottom, we did see substantial ice formation without any blood washout and the same 48 hours of shipping on dry ice and cryoprotective perfusion. So you might wonder, if there's no ice formation after field vitrification protocol, but there's also no ice formation in the brain after just a remote blood washout and shipping and cryoprotection, what's the difference? Why would you prefer to do a field vitrification over just a blood washout? And a few different reasons for that. One being that remote blood washout still permits progression of cold ischemic brain injury, as I kind of mentioned before. Even if you are quite cold, there's still some ischemic damage happening. And then there's also the fact that all blood washout solutions known to us currently don't prevent whole body edema, blood-brain barrier breakdown, and other associated problems during cryoprotectant perfusion. If you're already vitrified, you obviously have already bypassed all of these issues. And last but not least, blood washout is just not a credible option for very long delays, and especially when we're talking about international cases. Being able to vitrify first and ship at very low temperatures, such as dry ice, is by far optimal to the additional damage that would be incurred when shipping just after a blood washout and at water ice temperature. Now, there's also been, of course, speculation on shipping at liquid nitrogen temperatures, but the logistics of that get very, very complicated very, very quickly, especially in terms of airline shipments and the kind of shipping containers that are required for shipping in liquid nitrogen. So dry ice, much easier, still very, very low temperature, and outside of an extremely long delay, just as good as shipping at much lower temperatures of liquid nitrogen until the patient reaches the cryonics facility, where they can then, of course, be lowered to liquid nitrogen temperature. I do want to mention with the field vitrification research that this is still ongoing in terms of our methodology, perfection of our methods, in particular control of the cooling rate to simulate the cooling rate seen in a normal human case. All right, so all of this practical information basically to bring us to the point that, as usual, prevention is better than a cure. We really, really want to emphasize recognizing the benefits of moving to Alcor or to the area surrounding Alcor, of course, when you are much older or are diagnosed with a terminal illness. Part and parcel with that is keeping your cryonics organization, keeping Alcor informed of serious health problems or any scheduled surgeries, just in case there are complications, and creating a local cryonics group. I'm a huge proponent of this particular strategy and keeping in touch with other members. That is our local Cryonics Northwest group. Ashwin and I live in Portland, Oregon now, and there are actually quite a large number of cryonicists in the Pacific Northwest, and we've been very successful at bringing everyone together. Alcor and Aaron Drake, of course, have supported our efforts in stabilization training. And outside of those training sessions, we get together as often as possible. We celebrate Bedford Day, for example, every January. We have just local regular get-togethers in different people's homes. And sometimes we keep it cryonics specific, and sometimes we just get together to socialize because we're trying to keep those connections strong. And as my friend Todd Huffman, who's here and who'll be speaking later, likes to point out, whether purposefully or not, you're probably going to be less likely to care and respond to someone you don't know than someone you do know and have a connection with. So those are really strong reasons for building those connections and building a greater cryonics community. Outside of the fact that we need strong capabilities in all different parts of the United States and the world, and the only way we can do that is by banding together and getting to know each other and building those networks. So lastly, I'm going to talk about some of our new research directions and future endeavors. We did get a grant from the Life Extension Foundation this year to conduct whole brain electrophysiology research, which is pretty exciting. The objective will be to recover organized electrical activity in the brain after vitrification and cooling to cryogenic temperatures. And of course, recovering that kind of activity, EEG activity after vitrification, means that brains can be kept viable by contemporary medical criteria. That opens up a whole new can of worms in terms of legalities, but it builds an extremely strong case for cryonics as a realistic endeavor, and one that can be supported medically in the here and now. My acknowledgements, and one thing I do want to mention in closing is that we are still a part-time endeavor. I do, and Ashwin does. We have full-time day jobs outside of our research. We have more equipment than we can even have time to use at this point, and more ideas than we have the time and money for. So that's one of our biggest and strongest endeavors this year, is to garner the support to make this a full-time operation, and hopefully we can make progress in improving outcomes for cryonics patients even faster if we have that support. So I thank you.